Hello and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. It's that time of the week again for another episode of Hollenbeck Unleashed. Today we're going to be discussing European monetary policy versus US. Frank, thank you very much for coming in.
You're welcome.
Let's start with Europe. Can you talk us through firstly the ECB's commitment to unlimited purchase of debt on secondary markets?
Well, the ECB is actually in a dilemma situation in the sense that for the southern states, okay, take for example Spain, Italy or Greece, you have a situation where the banks are actually reducing the money supply in the sense that they're pulling in loans and also they have to increase their Tier 1 capital ratios. At the same time, because you have the public being fearful, they're also pulling money out of the system. So we have the money supply declining in the southern states while that money is being transferred to the northern states, and it's causing problems in the northern states. For example, prices in Berlin have increased 32% since 2007. Just last year, we had transactions go up 20% and sales go up 28%, and rents are basically increasing at a higher rate than inflation. So on one hand is the central bank should be basically loosening monetary policy for the southern states, but tightening monetary policy for the northern states. The second dilemma that the ECB has, and it relates to this unlimited commitment to purchase Spanish bonds, is that you almost have the impression that the ECB wants to be half pregnant in the sense that they want to help Spain by printing money, okay, to be able to purchase these bonds. But at the same time, they have Germany looking over their back saying, look, you know, we know the effects of printing money. We lived through it in the 1920s, okay? So at one point, you have the ECB wanting to help Spain by printing money, but then being restrained by Germany in the sense that it doesn't want to print money. Now, you talked about unlimited commitments. I think I've read this in the newspapers, and you've had several people come here and talk about an unlimited commitment by the ECB. Let me just qualify that a little bit. First, the ECB is willing to intervene if Spain asks for help from the ESM. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that it made a statement and said, yes, we're going to purchase Spanish bonds, which means we're going to print money, and we're going to purchase Spanish bonds. But at the same time, we're going to sterilize it. Now, what does that mean, sterilize it? In other words, what they're going to do is they're going to sell German bonds to take the money back out of the system. So that this is to satisfy the Germans that they're not increasing the money supply. The problem with that is the ECB already has a lot of questionable debt as assets. It already is holding a lot of Greek debt, Spanish debt, and Italian debt. So it only has so much German debt that it can sell. Okay? So in other words, it only has so much German debt that it can sterilize its purchases of Spanish bonds. So when we say unlimited, I think we need to qualify that is that it's going to run into a barrier, which is the amount of bonds that they can sell, German bonds that they can sell into the market. Ultimately, they'll have to, if they want to continue to help Spain, ultimately they will have to monetize some of that debt. And then we run into a problem with Germany in the sense that Germany is not going to want that to occur.
How then does this compare with the US? And in fact, we've got two quotes from Ben Bernanke. The first was discussing Japanese monetary policy, in fact. It says, most economists would agree that a large enough helicopter drop of newly created money must raise the price level at some point. The public would attempt to convert its increased real wealth into goods and services, spending that would increase aggregate demand and prices. And taking a look at the second, which was regarding deflation, we conclude that under a paper money system, a determined government can always generate higher spending and hence positive inflation. So that's quite a different outlook there then.
Yes, it is. What Bernanke is saying is that he's not really constrained by a 0% interest rate. He's basically saying is that I can put enough money into the system that is going to create inflation, in the sense that you may be in a situation where you've lost your job and you're going to have unemployment insurance for 6 months. If I give you $1,000, you're unlikely to go buy a flat screen TV with it. However, if I give you $1 million, you're likely to go go and spend it. So in other words, what Bernanke is basically saying is, I can put enough money into the system so that we get inflation, and then we'll deal with the inflation once that occurs. Okay, that's basically Bernanke's statement. Now, the only thing I have to say to that is that Paul Volcker, who was the chairman during the stagflation of the 70s, the US stagflation of the 70s, recently wrote an op-ed piece where he said, first, there's a lot of people talking about a little bit of inflation would be good. A lot of times, 2 or 3% inflation becomes 4 or 5% or 6% inflation. And what we've learned about inflation is that once you let the monster out, it's really hard to get it back into its cage, in the sense that once inflation expectations are ingrained in the public, it's very difficult to get inflation back under control, as was the situation in the 70s when he was chairman of the Federal Reserve System.
So what does that imply for the euro-US dollar relationship?
Well, I'm a true believer in a monetarist model of exchange rates, and I believe that exchange rates are determined by differences in monetary policy and anticipation of monetary policies into the future. So if we consider that Bernanke is going to print money and that the ECB is unlikely to print money, in the sense that it's going to be able to sell German bonds to counteract the printing of money to purchase Spanish bonds, and given the fact that Spain has already covered 90% of its financing needs for the year, probably will need another 200 billion next year, we can expect that over the next year that monetary printing will be more significant in the US than in Europe. So I would actually expect the euro to appreciate against the dollar over the next year. But again, I'm also a true believer in the efficient market hypothesis, which says that maybe a lot of these concepts I'm talking about is already reflected in the exchange rate. But if I had to make a prediction, I would say I would expect the euro to actually appreciate against the dollar over the next year.
Controversial as always. Thanks very much for coming in, Frank. Dr. Frank Hollenbeck will be back with us next week for another episode of Hollenbeck Unleashed. For now though, goodbye.